Dr. Walsh, and welcome to the Truth About Weight Loss Summit. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back, and it's good to see you, my friend. It's always an honor and a privilege, and we still use your book. We love it. I just wanted to tell you, my mother-in-law, my wife said to thank you for the book and for the great things you have in it.
Oh, that is so kind of you. Thank you so much. And thank you for your work, because I really appreciate that you're one of the few doctors that really talk about and understand food addiction. A lot of people don't believe that food is addictive or can be addictive. What do you say to that?
It would be nice to be able to say that food cannot be addictive, but what we know is that the brain's reward pathway can be hijacked. This is literally what happens with cocaine or caffeine or nicotine. And it's kind of be a bit naive to believe that food couldn't be engineered to have addictive qualities as well. And I think that's what you see once you start to look at food addiction and food cravings. And if you're ever going to lose weight and keep it off, this is something that has to be at the forefront of your mind. Are you eating foods? And we'll talk about that. I'll show some slides. Are you eating foods that feed you body, mind, and spirit? Or are you really feeding a craving that has been created kind of falsely by the food industry, by some of the products and processed things that they put into food?
Yeah, it's funny because the processed food industry actually calls their product cravables, bingeables.
Absolutely. And we talk about comfort foods. So we'll talk a little bit about stress as well and how all of that plays in. We are all very stressed. Before we came on, we were talking about, as a physician, what it's meant to be seeing patients in a pandemic. It's been very stressful. But it's not just the healthcare workers who are stressed. I see people from all walks of life who are incredibly stressed during this pandemic, having to take time off from work, losing their jobs, losing their businesses, losing loved ones. So the stress levels are very high, and these foods are designed to be comfort foods. And so we'll talk a bit about what that means and how stress can interplay with addiction and really stymie weight loss. I'm someone that we've talked about this before. I was born a big baby. My whole life I've struggled with weight, and stress is one of those triggers. I've lost about 60 pounds. I'm lifting weights. I'm actually trying to build muscle and do some things, but I have to stay mindful. And my wife and I were talking about this week. If I get stressed, food is still one of the things that I want to go to. And they have designed food that when you're stressed, feels better, tastes better, the texture of it, the contents of it, all work to pull you in, to get you to eat more and more and more and more. So we'll talk about all of those different things as we go through the slides. And I hope it's beneficial to others as they're in this walk, because it's not an easy walk, and you need to have support. One of the things, I don't know if I'll get to talking about it in depth today, but I will talk about having accountability partners, having realistic goals. And we were talking about a little bit about religion before we came on. And I'll quote a great text that says, "A just man falls 7 times and rises every time." And that really means to me that even if you mess up, even if you fail at what you're doing, learn the lessons from that fall and get back up and keep going. And that is one of the biggest secrets about weight loss, is that you cannot believe that you're going to nail it the first time. In fact, when you do addiction recovery work, as I used to work in addiction medicine, what we would say is relapse is part of recovery. And so sometimes when you fall, you learn the company that you're around that might help you to fall, the holiday that might cause it, what triggers. And so you can learn to avoid those things or learn how to manage them. So a lot to talk about because these are nuts and bolts issues around weight loss and permanent weight loss, which is really what we're after.
Exactly. And I love that you said that. People can't expect to get it right the first time. Very few people, even when they quit smoking, quit on the first attempt.
Absolutely. It takes several attempts. But what you want every time is to learn more, and you want to release more, meaning you don't want to go back to where you left off. So you do want to have every time experience in victory. So you want to beat something. So yeah, you fell, you went back, you ate, maybe you ate a pepperoni pizza or something, or 2 slices of a pepperoni pizza. You say, man, I got to start over. But what you learn is, listen, if the kids have friends over and all that there is to eat is pepperoni pizza, I might eat 2 slices of the pepperoni pizza. But if my kids have friends over and we make burritos, I can actually make a burrito that's very healthy, or I can make a pizza from scratch that's healthy if I'm not ordering it from a store. So trying to learn those lessons to give you tools to victory is also very important.
Yeah, great suggestions.
All right. So this is a bit about your brain on food and what happens to our cognition and how food can be addictive as well. And so one of the big questions, I mean, for me is this picture really says it all. You know, we always have these two options. Here in Connecticut, where I live, there's a Dunkin' Donuts on every corner. And sometimes you got to pass a Dunkin' Donuts to get to a Dunkin' Donuts. It's very crazy. Very popular restaurant brand, coffee shop, whatever you want to call it. But the other side of it is this apple that's being held that is not as highly promoted. You don't see commercials on television for apples or for other fruits and vegetables in general. And so we all have this really serious decision to make, because as we were just talking about, stress works to drive you to the donut and away from the apple because of the way that the donut is designed. And we'll talk about that in a second. There's a great nutritionist who coined this phrase: stress spelled backwards is desserts. And I probably mentioned this on the show before, and my colleague, Dr. Columbus Batiste, who's a brilliant in the plant-based world, we both talk about this because we see the connection between stress and disease, and stress and appetite, and stress and what people actually eat. So stress spelled backwards is desserts. And so we talk a lot about comfort foods, and what the industry is trying to do is to get us to when we're stressed, to turn to food for our comfort. Someone once said that especially processed food is the most overused antidepressant, and exercise is the most underused anti-anxiety medication or treatment. And so we have to keep those things in mind, that when we're stressed, one of the biggest, strongest things that we actually can do is to get out and exercise rather than turning to these foods. So does the industry work to keep us going back for more? Well, let the industry speak for itself. The Angus Third Pounder Deluxe, McDonald's billboard says, crafted for your craving. And so this is a way to get you to want to come into McDonald's and spend a whole lot of money, or not even a lot of money, but just to buy their products, because they're saying they've designed the food to do that. This is an interesting one. In an inner city, low-income neighborhood, these billboards were found, and you see at top, childhood obesity, don't take it lightly. And there's this doctor trying to encourage people to eat fruits and vegetables based on the sign and be active. But when you drop down, the other billboard is a McDonald's billboard that says, my kind of shopping spree, right? And they've got a dollar menu, and the mom there is double fisting, I'm assuming it's a mother, double fisting 2 bags of McDonald's. And so is food addicting? Well, what we do know is that the food industry is definitely pushing it, oftentimes with federal subsidies of the products themselves, and to some extent of the advertising, to get us to want it. And it's not just English-speaking people. This is desayuno rápido por $1. And it says in the corner of me encanto, which is I'm loving it. And so you can see that this push to get people to eat these foods is actually pretty profound. And the way I describe it is it's like bondage in a bag. I mean, what they really want you to do is to get these foods into you, and then trap you with them, right? And so you look at what an average size, the CDC put this out, the average size of a meal in the 1950s, of a fast food meal or a burger and fries type meal, 2.4 ounces of French fries, now that's 6.7 ounces. 3.9 ounces of burger. Now it's 12 ounces of burger. What a massive! I was watching football this morning, and ESPN, and they had Sonic commercial. I've never been to Sonic, but they had a commercial with like Texas toast, 2 layers of beef and cheese, and just a massive looking sandwich on the television. There's been a big increase in the portion sizes. And of course, the biggest jump is the size of the sodas. And what we know, soda has sugar, and sugar, I believe, is addictive. I'll show you some slides on that in a second. But the other side of it is sugar is also, it's not just sugar, it's also caffeine. Someone remember Coca-Cola, when it was started, actually had cocaine in it. Now it's caffeine and sugar. The caffeine does not change the taste of the drink, But it does make it so that you want to go back to the drink more and more, which brings you back to the soda or the artificial sweetener, neither of which really helps with weight loss. Not even the artificial sweeteners really do that. We can talk more about that later, but that's one of the big things. So we know that the food and beverage industry spends about $2 billion a year marketing to children. The fast food industry spends about $5 million every day marketing unhealthy food to children. And about all of it, 98% of the food advertisement viewed by children are for products that are high in fat, sugar, or sodium. Most of it is low in fiber. And one study found that when children were exposed to television content with food advertising, they consumed 45% more food than children exposed to content with non-food advertising. This is pretty powerful because what we know is the food companies are intentional. This is from one of the magazines. Melissa Kravitz-Hoffner wrote this piece, but food companies intentionally make their products addictive, and it's making us sick. Is food addicting? The studies are showing, and she says here, foods with unnaturally high levels of sugar and salt keep Americans snacking their way to obesity. So there is a lot saying that, but it's not just that. What's in it? It's sugar, it's fat and salt, and Michael Moss's books speak to that, but also things like MSG and casein, which is one of the proteins in cow's milk, cheese, and those types of things. These things are perfectly engineered for maximum taste and minimum nutrition. So this is what it's designed to do. MSG is a form of concentrated salt. According to researcher John Erb, MSG is added to food for the addictive effect it has on the human body. MSG interferes with appetite suppression, and therefore keeps you hungry even when you've had a large amount of food. According to research performed on mice, MSG was found to triple the amount of insulin created by the pancreas, so it shoots the insulin up. This causes animals to become obese without any additional food intake. MSG's effect on pancreas and the release of insulin means that every available calorie or more of the available calories are going to be stored as fat. Insulin, driving insulin levels up, also will long-term lead to more insulin resistance. Leptin insensitivity, we'll talk about leptin in a little while, which is what actually is supposed to help control the appetite. And all of these things work together to make it so when you have high insulin levels, you're going to gain weight, you're going to become more likely to become diabetic and lead towards metabolic syndrome, which is actually really the worst part of the obesity epidemic. Here's what Joe Furman, who is a brilliant, brilliant guy, written many books. Probably many of you have read his books. But he has a great quote here that I want to read. The modern food and drug industry has converted a significant portion of the world's people to a new religion, a massive cult of pleasure seekers who consume coffee, cigarettes, soft drinks, candy, chocolate, alcohol, processed foods, fast foods, and concentrated dairy fat or cheese in a self-indulgent orgy of destructive behavior. He then says, when the inevitable results of such bad habits appear, pain, suffering, sickness, and disease, the addicted cult members drag themselves to physicians and demand drugs to alleviate their pain, mask their symptoms, and cure their diseases. These revelers become so drunk on their addictive behavior and the accompanying addictive thinking that they can no longer tell the difference between health and health care. I love that quote. Means a lot, because what really is happening is that when you add salt, sugar, and fat, and this is, again, talking about Michael Moss's book, these food industries bring these things together to create bliss points. This is one example when they use salt and just the right amount of salt to reach what's called a bliss point. They do this with sugar and with fat. And the goal is to get the brain to release just that right amount of dopamine or the maximum amount of dopamine before the food is unpleasant. And so you maximize these ingredients in the right quantities to get you to want to come back to it. Dopamine is the neurochemical that tells you that is the I gotta have it chemical. It's what drives cocaine addiction. So if you can get this in food, you'll bring people back. And the food industry has figured it out. Another interesting thing is this concept of vanishing calories, vanishing caloric density. So when you eat Cheetos and some of these foods that crunch, 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 but they melt in your mouth, your brain hears the crunch like it would with a cucumber or with an apple, but it never gets the satisfaction of the fiber, the filling effect. And so what happens is you keep eating them, and you can eat them and eat them and eat them. And so the industry says, I bet you can't eat just one. Unlike the tobacco industry that said, no, our product is not addicting. The food industry says, I bet you can't eat just one. And they say things like, once you pop, you can't stop. So the food industry really has pushed this thing. New York Times run these articles on food addiction. You can look these things up and see them. And what we know is that these things affect the brain. And so I'm going to stop here. We can take we can do some discussing. We'll come back to how these things actually affect the brain. But in case you wanted to discuss any of the slides we just showed, kind of my passion when I talk to patients is that, you probably wouldn't go to the corner drug dealer and pick anything up, but we don't realize that in a sense, some of the foods we're being given, literally, their intent is not that different than someone who wants to addict you to an addictive substance like cocaine. They want you coming back. They want year-over-year profits to be increased, and they're probably not that concerned about how it impacts your health. That's your job. We have to be concerned about how these things impact our health and then do what we need to do to mitigate those effects.
I will hand it to McDonald's, at least for their honesty in advertising, saying we created it for your craving.
Absolutely.
Why do you think the portions increased fourfold since 1950?
I think there's a lot of reasons that happened. I think one of them is you can probably charge more the bigger portions. I think it also has everything to do with repeat customers. There was a place, I think it's a restaurant out in California called Claim Jumpers. And I didn't go there a lot because I don't eat meat, but the few times I've been, I couldn't believe the portion sizes. I mean, it was like Fred Flintstone, that big side of ribs, he would try and tip his whole car over. I was like, man, these are huge portions. But because of these huge portions, people feel like they're getting a good deal, right? They feel like it's a good money well spent. I get a doggy bag I can take home. And of course, the food is still full of salt and sugar and fat to get you to want to eat as much of it as possible. So you get these massive portions. You clearly overeat just trying to eat 2/3 of it. But it's good for business. It brings people back. And I think that's partly why the portion sizes increase so drastically.
You mentioned salt, sugar, and fat. You called it the evil triad. I actually, in my book 10 years ago, called it the evil trinity. And a couple of the speakers on the summit said we were never meant to have the taste of sugar and fat in our mouth at the same time.
Absolutely. If you look at nature, there's a couple of interesting things about when you look at nature and sugar and fat. Interestingly enough, there's no foods where these two things really come together well. Avocados have natural fat, but they don't really have a lot of sugar. Coconuts are probably the closest thing to that, where there is some sweetness to a coconut and there is fat in a coconut. But in general, an apple has no fat. And an avocado has very little. If you just look at the plant world, very little sugar. If you look at the plant world, so that's true. Even more interesting to me is when you look at sugar in nature, fructose is always bound to fiber. And so it is really a new phenomenon in the last several hundred years where you can extract and separate sugar from a food and feed pure sugar to someone. That is a new, more recent occurrence. Now, the reason that that's interesting is because the only other place you can get fructose in nature where it is not bound to fiber is a honeycomb. Honey, that's it. And even then, it is guarded by bees. So it's not something that we were designed to just have, all we wanted. It was probably something that once in a blue moon, if you lived in a village, somebody might get a beehive and get some honey. Clearly wouldn't have been a whole lot of it. But by separating sugars, fructose, and of course, sucrose, as we see it on table sugar, away from fiber, we have done things to our bodies that are really never before done much in human history, because what we are doing is really exposing ourselves to high quantities of a highly refined and addictive substance that wreaks havoc all over our bodies, especially in our livers, and absolutely affects the brain and its functioning as well, and makes you want more and more and more of it, and actually extracts nutrients from the body. So it's true. It's a new phenomenon, something we've not seen, and you're never going to be healthy. You're never going to keep off weight if you have the kind of sweet tooth where you're eating sugar unopposed by fiber. It's going to be a very difficult thing to do.
This is one of the most brilliant things said on the summit, because it's a perspective to look at it, because people are always arguing that their sugar is healthier. Well, molasses is healthy. There's trace minerals or maple syrup or coconut sugar or all these other ones. But what you're saying is it doesn't matter, because when you take the fiber away, it's all the same.
All the same. And I hate to tell people that, because, you know, there are people who think, well, I'm gonna get this coconut sugar that has a little magnesium, so it's healthy. And you know, maybe the fact that there's some magnesium has some benefit, but there are much healthier ways to get magnesium than to these sugar products. And so I tell people the only sugar I would ever recommend is date sugar, which is a whole food. You know, it's a process. You don't process it. It's just the dates ground up. So there's still fiber in it. It's not going to make food feel and taste the way the other one does, because the fiber is still in it. But the challenge is to retrain our palates. And what I've learned by pulling salt out of my diet, all of a sudden you can live without salt. You pull oils out of your diet, you can live without oils. You get an air fryer and you cut up a sweet potato into small pieces, season it up, let it soak overnight, let it dry out in the morning. You put it in the air fryer. It can crisp those sweet potatoes, and you actually have a very healthy, fiber-filled meal that is actually very low in calories, comparatively speaking, if you just take one sweet potato at 70 or 90 calories. So we've got to change the way we view food, and we've got to change the way we think about eating foods, so that we are moving away from these substances that drive us to eat more and more and more.
Yeah. Do you think that there's any significance to the fact that I think it was around 1980 where they changed it from sugar in liquid like sodas to fructose?
Absolutely. The high fructose corn syrup, if that's what you're referring to, especially, it really is a bit diabolical, probably is a bit more addictive, and actually affects the body even in a more profound way than regular sugar does. So it was cheaper, which is one of the reasons why the industry switched over, but it also gave them the benefit of allowing for this kind of addiction in their products probably at a little higher tick. So yeah, it was one of the interesting switches. I mean, you know something's wrong when you can buy soda for less than you can buy water. Something interesting is happening when that happens. And what we found is that some of these ingredients in sugar are so highly subsidized by the government, right? So we started doing these crops where there's just unicrops, just one crop. And corn became a big one. And what do you do with all the leftover corn? What do you do with all the extra pieces to the corn? And one of the things was corn oil, and the other one was high fructose corn syrup. And it allowed the government to subsidize the production of this crop. And then, of course, all of these pieces of it, which again are highly processed, really work against our health and towards food addiction.
Isn't it even more problematic though when whether it's sucrose or glucose or fructose in liquid form than if it's like, say, even in a dessert that might have other ingredients? Doesn't it just hits you even faster when you're drinking it?
Absolutely. And so I remember reading once that when you drink, like we grew up, I hate to say this, but Kool-Aid was a big thing when I was a kid, and my grandmother loved to give us Kool-Aid. My mother wouldn't do it as much, but my grandmother loved when we went over her house to give us Kool-Aid. And Kool-Aid, I didn't know it at the time. Kool-Aid is sugar. That's literally what it is. It's flavored dyed sugar.
It's colored sugar.
And my grandmother would still add sugar to it. She'd I remember taking that 5-pound bag and pouring it in to a big pitcher, and we'd all drink Kool-Aid. When you drink that Kool-Aid, you begin to absorb the sugar in your esophagus. It doesn't even hit your stomach, and you're starting to already get the sugar rush. When you pick sugar up that quickly, insulin levels shoot up in order to absorb the sugar. And so you get these sugar highs, then you get these sugar lows, which can mess with the temperament, how you feel, messes with memory and alertness. And of course, once the sugar drops out, your body says, I'm hungry, I'm starving. And so these simple processed sugars that come in so fast and go out so fast drive you to want to eat more as well.
Aren't these advertisements for this junk food and processed food disproportionately found in lower income neighborhoods?
Absolutely. I don't know if I put any slides here, but even the average TV advertising is far more likely among African-American children. One, because they watch more TV, and the shows that cater to African-Americans are more likely to have advertising that come from some of these junk food companies. But it's not just African-Americans, it's Latinos. And I would argue, after living in the rural South, that when you look at the billboards in the rural South, which is predominantly white, it's not that different either. I think low-income people across the board are targeted because if you're a parent, you're trying to, and I can only think of my single mother when I was growing up, you're trying to find ways to treat your child. Well, you might not be able to afford to put your kid in a car and drive to Disney World or Disneyland and spend, $400, $500 in a day, but you can take them to McDonald's. You can take them to Burger King. They can have a Happy Meal. They can get a little toy in the package, and you can give them a little bit of happiness, a little treat. And so I think for whatever reason, these things are. And added to that, when you're lower income, there's a lot more stress. There's a lot more stress in the life of someone with less resources. And so these comfort foods probably work a whole lot better. And these corporations have figured that out. This is a great way to make extra money by actually making their money off of the people with the least money in the country.
Yeah, that's really unfair. And like you said, I've never seen a commercial for a fruit or a vegetable in my life.
Never. I'm trying to think, maybe in California I saw an almond commercial, maybe pecan, stuff like that. But in general, you just don't see collard green commercials or turnip green commercials, spinach commercials. You don't see watermelon, apples, and you should. The truth of the matter, if the U.S. government really wanted to change the health of our country, we would stop talking about health care and we talk about health, and we would subsidize and fund advertising for foods that we know prevent and reverse disease. But clearly, that's just not happening.
You have worked in that sector, though. How can we affect change?
There are a lot of people working hard, but the people in public health simply don't have the resources to go against to influence the best way to say is to influence the government the way that some of the lobbyists for some of these big food and agriculture corporations do, right? So I mean, it's going to be very difficult to go against whoever owns Nabisco when you're a public health department, because your funding is bare minimum and theirs is almost unlimited. So their ability to influence policymakers is very great, especially when they can give to campaigns and help people get elected and that kind of stuff. So it is unfortunate, but the reality is that policy, in many ways, still follows money. It's not a hard and fast truth, because we've seen that when the tobacco industry was curtailed. The irony is that even with all that happened to the tobacco industry, look at a graph of their stock values, and you'd be surprised. They survived even that pretty well, as they still have a base of people who are addicted. And I think the food industry, no matter what we do, would continue to make the kind of profits where they are going to be able to fight a lot of what would be common sense things to make America healthier.
Yeah, I'm astonished that they get new smokers.
There's a lot of ways that happens, and one of them is the stress, the challenges, the difficulties of life, people trying to, in many ways, self-medicate. The painful nature that this life can sometimes cause folk. And unfortunately, we don't have the kind of mental health system to help with that. And so it's not just cigarettes and alcohol, and it's food, as a way that people try to self-medicate against things that are going on in their lives.
The thing that one of the experts on the summit, Dr. Frank Sabatino, said how food addiction is the only addiction you can just do in public. Like even smoking, you can't do at your job anymore. You can't really be drinking alcohol at your job. But most jobs have break rooms with hyperpalatable foods. Even hospitals have cafeteria with vending machines. It's very socially acceptable to eating these foods, which are very affordable.
When you said that, you remind me of something. One of the places I worked in California, at the clinic, there was a healthy grocery store. If you cut through our back parking lot and walked all the way across their parking lot, I was out in the desert in California at this time, so it was, some days it'd be 110 degrees outside, but I would make the walk because I wanted a break at lunchtime, and I felt like walking 15 minutes to go buy my food and walking 15 minutes back was a good thing to do, and I would do it almost every day. And I'll never forget, one day I was walking. There was an overweight young lady in a car parked by a tree so that she would get some shade because it was so hot. This is in Bakersfield, California. It was so hot. And she had bags of food, and she was just stuffing her face with hamburgers and French fries. And as I walked by the car, my heart melted. I wanted to actually stop and say, "Hey, are you okay?" or talk to her. But tears were streaming down her face as she was just stuffing her face with this food. And I know what she was going through. And I said, man, this thing is for real, like you said, it's an addiction. She could sit in the parking lot of a grocery store and eat this food and people just walk by as if nothing's going on. If she was smoking a crack pipe or shooting up a heroin needle, somebody would call the police. But it is an addiction you can absolutely do in public.
And many people can relate to this, Dr. Walsh, and they believe what the experts are saying on the summit, what the healthiest way to eat and live is, yet it's still very hard for them to stop eating these foods. They get cravings, they go through detox, if you will.
Absolutely. You know, you don't need to smoke a cigarette. You don't need that. You actually don't need to have alcohol in your house. You won't die if you don't have alcohol in your house, and if you never walk back into a bar. But you have to eat 2 to 3 times every single day at a minimum. And for that reason, every time we have to eat, every time we feel hungry, that the addictive nature of food reappears in each one of our lives, right? Every time we have to eat, we have to make a decision again as to what we're going to eat, which is one of the reasons why we have to change our palate. We've got to remove some of the addictive things from our diets, and we've got to move towards making good choices be the easiest choice, so that we form the type of habit where, for me, like the idea of eating real meat is just foreign to me. In fact, as happy as I am that Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger exist, I don't like eating them because they remind me of meat, and I've learned to not like meat, right? So I don't want something a fake version of meat. So for me, I'd rather make a veggie burger out of chickpeas or black beans, or my wife makes the mushrooms. You know, we use those I'd rather do that because I'd rather the texture, feel, and taste of a plant. And some of us have to really say, how do I retrain my palate so that when I'm eating, my go-to foods are healthy? And that's not easy to do. It takes some work and some training, but it can be done.
What advice do you give to your patients as the first step to retrain their palate?
I was hoping I had an index card around. One of the things I tell my patients to do is to get an index card and write on one side one reason that they're trying to make this change, right? So you write on one side, and when I worked in I worked at the nicotine addiction clinic at the Veterans Hospital in Loma Linda, California. We would have some of those veterans would write, "I want to be alive to see my granddaughter get married," and the granddaughter was 6. You know, I want to be alive to see my whatever, do something later in life, or I want to be around for this or that. So we'd write one reason you want to make the change. And on the other side of the card, we'd write a motivational thought, right? So, many of the vets were Christians. They would write, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Some of them weren't, and they would write, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. I can do this. They'd write these motivational thoughts. And what it would do is, before you eat, you pull out the index card and you read both sides of it, so that you're more mindful in eating, that this particular meal impacts whether or not I'm going to be able to do this later on in life. But the other side of it is, it also, I can do this. The motivation to make the right decision is on that index card. Now, most of us have cell phones. The good news is you can take your cell phone and probably figure out a way to do this. I'm not that tech savvy, so I still have the index cards to walk around with. But that's one simple trick. Another way to make this change is accountability. Keeping track of what you eat and how you feel before you eat. It's tedious. I'm not a big fan of tracking food and all that. But what I've found is that it is actually very effective in change, because we often don't realize how much junk we eat or what we eat if we're not keeping track of it. And that would direct our behavior in a new direction. The other thing is making sure that you give yourself 21 to 28 days to make the change. Setting a quit date in the future. So let's say for me, I'm going to give up sugar. Let's just say, well, what you do is you say, okay, 2 weeks from now, all the sugary foods. So you read the labels, you look at what's sugary, you remove it. You say, I'm going to try and replace them with whole foods. And so when I have a sweet tooth, I'm going to have, honey drop or moon drop grapes or whatever they're called. I'm going to have, I'm going to have some dates. I'm going to have apples the type of apples that I really like. And I'm going to be intentional about eating those foods when I want sweets, rather than eating a cupcake or a donut. Those are the changes over time as how you retrain the brain.
Right. It takes some time, is what you're saying.
Yep.
And, people are exposed to these junk foods a lot earlier these days, even in utero.
Well, first of all, in utero, and we know it does affect the child. the stress of the mother affects the child, the diet of the mother affects the child, crosses the placenta and actually enters in, and the child will be born with certain cravings as well. You tie that with the fact that many, when a child is not breastfed, the formula actually can often have large amounts of sugar and fats that will basically lead the child to want to eat those foods long term as well. So you're right. The children are exposed to this in utero early in life. And then, of course, the school lunch programs, many of the snacks, even we as parents buy. I see a lot of parents buy like French toast sticks frozen, give them to their kids. And when you read the ingredients, it is literally white bread with animal protein and fat from egg and sugar. Literally, that's what it is. Very little nutritional value, if any at all, but sets the child up to have the kind of cravings for these foods for the rest of their life.
And what effect do you think they have on our waistline?
A horrible effect on our waistline. I'll go into the slides and show some more of how leptin affects this. But when you have these massive releases of sugar, the insulin levels have to shoot up. When your insulin levels are chronically high, that's how you get insulin resistance, which is the first step towards diabetes. But you also become leptin resistant. And once you become leptin resistant, and leptin is a hormone released by your fat cells that tells your brain, hey, I'm a fat cell and I'm stuffed. We don't need to eat any more food. Turn down the appetite. If your brain signal from leptin is turned off or resistant, your appetite is going to be messed up and you're going to eat even when you're not actually physiologically hungry, meaning that there's no need for any more nutrient or more importantly, any more caloric energy. So these foods do that. And once they do that, it will naturally expand the waistline. This is why going to a whole food plant-based diet works the way it does, because it naturally brings the insulin levels back down, increasing leptin sensitivity. And at the same time, the food has less calories for the amount of space it takes up. So it works from 3-4 different angles to actually create satiety, nutrient density, so that your brain says, wow, we're getting a lot of really good nutrients. We don't need to eat a whole lot of food. But then it's still a large volume because of the fiber, so you do feel full and satisfied. It works on all 3 levels, and this is why this is such a great way to lose weight.
I know we had Dr. Rolls on the summit, and absolutely calorie density low, nutrient density high, volume huge, fiber water. It's really the key to the kingdom.
It's the key to the kingdom. Let me show a few more of these slides, and then we can go back into questions. Let me see if I can find where I'm at. So, did that work?
Not yet. I'm just seeing a black screen.
How about now? Okay. So, one of the things that we found is that these foods, we're just talking about these foods, Oregon State University researchers found that diets high in fat and sugar causes changes in the gut bacteria. And this can actually change cognitive flexibility. And what this means is that it can actually impact how well our brains work, which would impact, of course, the way we make decisions. So this is one of the reasons why changing the way we eat really matters. This is a diagram, and you can see up here, if you take a bottom-up approach and you're eating healthier foods, there's no inflammation, the healthy gut bacteria barrier is in line, so you have this. But if you eat foods that feed the wrong type of gut bacteria, it actually damages the barrier between your gut and your body and your blood. And so inflammatory things will slip across. And when these things slip across, they actually do affect the brain. Now, sugar is one of the ways that they get us to eat these foods. And we talked about this before. This is the normal brain. This is a brain on cocaine. This is a sugar user, cocaine user, sugar user. Look at how similar they are. The low dopamine, lack of pleasure, driving you to want more and more and more and more. Because of the way it affects the brain. The sugar users actually change the dopaminergic pathway in the brain of one that, where it says here, regular consumption of sugar will reduce your natural ability to experience pleasure, which means you need more and more of a stimulus to experience pleasure. Another interesting one here, salt. High salt impairs cerebral blood flow regulation, and this means that you don't get the same type of blood flow. And we know that high blood pressure can be induced by salt, and high blood pressure is correlated with strokes. I just want to show this one just as a reminder before we get into a couple of other things. that certain meats have actually been called or classified, I should say, as group 1 cancer-causing agents, with others being red meats that are classified as probably cause cancer. Dr. Neil Barnard is another brilliant physician in the plant-based world, and his book, The Cheese Trap, really breaks down the fact that cheese itself, because of the one of the chemicals in it that is similar to like a morphine or related to like morphine, casomorphones, they actually can cause low-grade addiction. This is why people want to go vegan or whole food plant-based. They often find that it's more difficult to give up cheese than it is to give up meat. But this, going back to the gut, Cleveland Clinic studies reveal the role of red meat in gut bacteria, heart disease development. So we know that this is critical, and it plays into how other things happen. And we know that the TMAOs, the trimethylamine oxide, is a molecule linked to cardiovascular disease and inflammatory condition. And when we eat carnitine, look down here, our gut bacteria break it down, and this comes from the meat. Carnitine comes from the muscle tissue of the meat. So even if it's free range, whatever it is, you still get the carnitine. Breaks it down to TMA, which breaks it down to TMAO. And the study showed that vegans and vegetarians produce less TMAO than omnivores because their gut microbiome has been changed. And so it's so that by default, we have less of an ability to make these damaging changes to the blood vessels in the body that would cause disease, specifically heart disease, strokes, and so forth. But as we really begin to look at this inflammation, and I believe the inflammation plays into the addiction part of this as well, certain foods such as meats appear to harbor bacteria that can trigger inflammation that are alive. There's over 100 million bacteria per quarter pound of beef. The endotoxins exist even after the meat is cooked or even placed in acid like our stomachs. The saturated fat and meat products help the endotoxins cross the gut wall into the bloodstream, causing the inflammation. This inflammation is important because this is, the talk is food, your brain on food. Well, what happens when you eat this stuff? For Alzheimer's sufferers, brain inflammation ignites a neuron-killing forest fire, right? So this is probably part of what leads to what we're finding with dementia. And one of the other things, I should have put the slide earlier, but it's here now. But when we eat fat, what the studies also show is that fat lubricates the appetite. Saturated fat dulls the brain's response to key appetite hormones, an effect useful in our evolutionary past during times of scarcity, but not so much in a well-fed society. And so this article really talks about the fact that when you eat lots of fat, it actually drives your appetite up. So let's step back. We now know that salt, and especially MSG, increases appetite. We now know that sugar works like cocaine, dulls the dopamine response, making it so that you want to eat more as well, because you need more of the stimulus to get the pleasure. Sugar also causes these insulin spikes, which drives up appetite as well. And now we know the fat does the same thing through a myriad of ways. One of them is by impacting the gut microbiome, causing inflammatory products to cross the gut wall and affect the brain directly. When we get like this, our insulin levels stay high from this combination of foods. And the last slide I was going to show is where the fat actually blocks the insulin receptor, causing insulin resistance. And when that happens, now your insulin levels stay high. And the last part of this is when the insulin levels stay high, as we said earlier, your leptin sensitivity goes low. When you have low leptin sensitivity, what happens is you now have a totally botched appetite, and you will eat even when you're not hungry. And you will probably crave the foods that got you into the predicament in the first place, creating a vicious downward spiral into a food situation that is very difficult to control, which must then be unpacked with intention. It's not just going on some program where they ship you frozen foods and you eat like some of the big, I don't want to name any of them, some of these big programs that have been out for many years. It's not just calorie reduction, because reducing the number of calories of the foods that cause the problem is not going to cause the problem to go away. This is a complete total transformation of the way we see food and the way we eat. And so getting the salt out of our diet, getting the sugar out of our diet, getting the oils. Oil is a processed food. Olive oil, coconut oil, still a processed food. And if you're using a lot of it in your food, which a lot of people do, they fry things, they add it to recipes, and it's in most of the food you eat. Pick up anything in the grocery store, and one of the first 4 ingredients is going to be sugar and some form of oil. These things drive appetite, create food addiction, and make it so that it's almost impossible to lose weight. Oil especially, end on fat. Oil especially. Why? Because it is so calorie dense. Because just a couple tablespoons has more calories than a whole sweet potato or baked potato, which, especially sweet potatoes I love, or a big, 2 cups of spinach, way more calories. So you're going to get this little tiny bit of volume of food that is not going to satiate you but it is going to add so much calories to your diet, block your insulin receptors, make you more insulin resistant, make you more leptin resistant, and make it more difficult for you to actually make good decisions about what you eat.
That little sound you heard was a bell that I was picking up, because there's something you said that I have to, I'm sorry, it was so brilliant. Reducing the number of calories of the food that caused the problem is not going to make the problem go away. And that's what most people do when they go on a diet. They weigh and measure their food. They count calories, carbs, or points, or they go on keto, but they're still eating the wrong food.
Absolutely. And what that does is just make your body produce, the leptin system is thrown even more off. So you might be able to pull it off through willpower, grit your teeth, and do it for 4 weeks or 6 weeks. But when you finally relax, your body overwhelms you with the desire for more food, and you more than make up for what you lost. And this is why we have yo-yo dieting. That does not happen when you fundamentally change what you eat. When what you eat is spinach and broccoli and cauliflower, chickpeas without the oil, curried chickpeas, you make black beans and kidney beans, and you're making lentils, and you're making your breakfast is full, or your lunch is full of fruits that take up a lot of space. You're eating whole grain foods, brown rice, and quinoa. These foods are very filling, and they don't have this effect because you can eat more of it. Your body's not being tricked by foods that really have low nutrients but high calorie density. This food is low calorie density, high nutrients, and breaks the cycle that has been binding you.
That was so interesting about fat lubricating the appetite, salt stimulating the appetite, but except for whole food, none of it really satisfies the appetite.
Never. It's a very temporary fix. It's just like drugs, right? I mean, I've worked in addiction medicine. You talk to people, they have these immense cravings for whatever their drug of choice is, and within a few hours, they're right back where they started. And that's what a lot of the processed foods, animal products, that's what they do. They lead you right back to where you started, worse than where you started. Whereas when you eat a whole food, plant-based diet, the satiety lasts much longer. And of course, the benefits last longer. The quality of your life, the quality of your health, even the health of your skin, it shows. And all of these things, all these positive feelings, you look in the mirror, you see the difference. Forget weight loss. Just the feeling you get from eating this food, the way it clears you. I didn't get a lot to get into the brain fog that these foods cause. But when you start to get the mental clarity back, that the inflammation that these foods cause that goes to your brain and causes the brain fog, when you get the mental clarity back, it should motivate you to continue to make the decisions that got you that clarity. And I've talked to many coworkers who've made the switch for a month. A lot of churches in a Black community, in the first month of the year, they do a Daniel fast. They basically go vegan for the month. And people say, man, I think so much more clearly. But then they go back in February to the way they were eating. That clarity is your body telling you, this is the way I was designed to eat.
Yeah. You had said that you need more and more to experience the same amount of pleasure. To me, that proves that it's addictive. That is the definition of addiction, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the nice thing about a whole food plant-based diet is you eat and you feel very satisfied when you're done eating. But when people eat fast food, and I'm growing up, I ate fast food. You eat fast food, 4 hours, 5 hours later, you're dying for the same thing all over again. You want to go back to the same thing. And, we know a lot about intermittent fasting now. We know a lot about spacing meals. It's very difficult to do that when you're eating foods that drive your appetite up because it just doesn't stay with you long enough. And so that's why making the switch helps to break the cycle.
You mentioned that vegans produce less TMAO. I'm not sure everybody in the audience really knows what that is and why this is important.
So TMAO, again, comes from carnitine in the muscle fibers of the meat. So vegans don't eat meat. So simply because you don't eat meat, it doesn't feed those bacteria in your gut that break down the carnitine into TMAO. That process doesn't happen in your gut. So because you don't have the bacteria. So when they give vegans and vegetarians meat to eat, they don't have the bacteria, meaning that they don't make TMAO. And TMAO breaks the gut barrier down, and so allows a lot more inflammatory things in. And that is the real problem, because when those inflammatory things come in, they cause all kinds of disease. This is where you see people in their 50s, 40s, I see, with severe arthritis, gout, brain issues, early onset dementias. All of this is tied to these foods, and the fact that you mess up the gut microbiome, you allow the gut to become leaky. These things leak into the bloodstream and cause these diseases that we think are diseases of aging that aren't actually.
What impact do you see with patients that are eating these foods that probably, I'm guessing, in most of them create excess body weight?
Absolutely. So they definitely, again, these foods drive the system that makes you want to eat more. They make you insulin resistant, which leads to the leptin resistance. It means you have to produce more insulin to get the same effect. And the leptin, even when you produce more of it, when you eat more, it doesn't have its effect. So once that happens, by default, insulin, when you have high insulin levels, even if you eat less calories, every calorie, that insulin is going to try and store all of it. And that's the difference. It's going to try and store it all into fat. That's what insulin, big part of what insulin does. And it doesn't just store it in fat on your outside of your body. Probably as dangerous or more dangerous is that it stores fat around your liver and around your visceral organs. And that is the fat that actually it is very, very dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about how there was disparity socioeconomically. A lot of people think healthy eating is a luxury. Do you think it's possible for everyone that has the desire to eat healthfully?
I think you do. There are some good websites. I can't name them off the top of my head, but there are some good websites that show that if you learn how to shop, you actually can shop for less. Some of the government programs have done a better job of allowing people who are on food stamps or WIC or whatever to pick healthier foods. But at the end of the day, you pay for it one way or the other. So I do believe you buy whole bags of dry beans, dry foods, you're going to get it at a much lower price. And if you cook it yourself, you're going to do better. And so I do think that's definitely the first thing. It can actually be a less expensive way to do it. And then sometimes, like I'm a single mother, didn't always have time to cook. So you might have to learn to cook, bigger portions on Sundays and Wednesdays and store them and eat them during the week. There's a whole system and science. I'm not the chef you are. There's ways to do all of that, right? But you pay for it one way or the other. I have patients who, big chunks of their income goes to pills, hospital visits, procedures. It breaks my heart sometimes when I see patients and they tell me how much they're paying for medications or how much their hospital bills are. So, you're going to pay for it one way or the other. And at the end of the day, Elon Musk and Bill Gates and all these great guys with all these Bezos, all this billions of dollars, that is wonderful. Great for them. But let me tell you, nothing is more healthy. Nothing is more wealthy than being healthy. And you can look at some of the people who are filthy rich who die early. What would they give to get those years back that they lost? And so I challenge you that we can all be wealthy because we can all be healthy. And that is the greatest resource we actually can have.
I already eat this way, but I'm just still re-inspired to do it. I feel like you're a minister and I'm just like attending. I mean, it's just brilliant. What's coming out of your mouth today. Nothing is more wealthy than being healthy. Yeah. Do your patients ever make the association between their excess weight and lifestyle diseases and what they're eating, or do you have to point it out to them?
I think a lot of times you have to point it out. I think what's sad in America, especially when every time we have a presidential election, it's all about healthcare systems and who's health insurance and Medicare for all. And those arguments need to be had. Those are important things. I'm not discrediting it. There's very little discussion about actual health. We live in a country where the average person actually has no idea the connection between what they're eating and their diagnoses. I see people who I talk to them about their high blood. Let's just use high blood pressure as an example. And we talk about what they eat. Oh, I eat fast food so many times a week. At home, we eat these processed things that are easy to make, high in salt. And I say, have you ever made the connection between the fat in the food you're eating, the sugar in the food you're eating, and especially the salt in the food you're eating, and your hypertension? And they say, no, I've never made that. I've never made the connection. So there's a lot of work. And this is why what you're doing is so important. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. The American people, it's difficult to tell people to choose to eat healthy if they actually don't have the information they need to make the choice. And I think that is because when you look at how medical schools historically were funded by some of these industries, or in part funded by these industries, even going all the way back to elementary school, I remember there were posters all over the place promoting dairy products. And we now know the casein, the fat in milk, these things aren't good for you. Yet this is what we were all trained. Milk, it does a body good, and it doesn't. And so we have to unlearn that. People have to learn that milk is not the best way to build strong bones and muscles, that spinach is a far better way to do that. But the average American doesn't know that. And there are many of them who say they don't care, but I would rather they make a decision. They say, listen, I don't care if meat is bad for me or if donuts are bad for me, I'm going to eat them anyway. That's a different thing than I had no idea these things were bad for me. I thought there was no connection between my donut eating and my diabetes. That is a worse state to be in as a nation, because true democracy means that the people have to be educated and knowledgeable.
Right, because a lot of them say, well, diabetes runs in my family, when in reality, it's your eating style that runs in your family. And when I think about the things you were talking about, sugar and fat and MSG and all the different addictive components of food casein, when you think about a typical fast food meal, cheeseburger, fries, and a shake, that's the perfect storm. That literally
Absolutely
hits every addictive food that you mentioned.
And throw in caffeine. I mean, so a lot of times it's not just the salt, the sugar, the fat. You can throw in caffeine, because when I was a kid, my mother didn't buy soda in our house, but if I got a chance to get out and have a Dr. Pepper, I was in heaven. I mean,
oh my God, that was my favorite too. That was my favorite doctor growing up.
I was in heaven. I mean, I haven't had a Dr. Pepper in years, but it was my favorite. But I didn't, as a kid, realize that there was caffeine in these drinks and Coca-Cola and other things. So you actually got a rush from it. And I had a neighbor once who drank, I forget how many cases of Diet Pepsi a day. And the studies overwhelmingly show diet sodas don't do what we think they do. They actually, promote weight gain as well, because these artificial sweeteners aren't that good for you. And so it's a sad thing, because the food is addictive, and there's no reason to put caffeine in the drink. You can't taste the caffeine. It's there because it makes you want to buy another one.
Exactly. And a lot of people think, well, I'll just use, stevia, erythritol, xylitol, 0 calorie, low calorie sweeteners. And it still affects insulin.
It tricks the brain into thinking something's coming that isn't coming. And when it doesn't get there, the brain says, hey, I need sugar. And so you wind up actually eating more, is what the studies show.
Thank you for saying that, because it's just something I've been trying to drive home for years, but people keep thinking that they're eating healthy sweeteners when, like you said, if it's not the fruit, the whole fruit, nothing but the fruit, it's probably not something you should be eating.
Absolutely.
You started off by saying how we're living in very stressful times, with the pandemic. And I think a lot of people don't exercise at all. So how can we help people mitigate their stress so that they can learn healthier behaviors instead of just turning to these foods that are comforting in the short term, but really deleterious to their health in the long term?
I think one of the things is a lot of people think that if they're going to exercise, they've got to get a gym membership and buy yoga pants and expensive sneakers and join up with a club. For a lot of people who are overweight, that is not a very comfortable thing. Nobody, it's very difficult to go into a gym with all these buff, ripped people, and you don't feel good. You can't exercise the way they can. So for me, when Columbus and I, on our show, when we talk about it, we say begin outside of the kitchen when it comes to food. So start off by getting enough sleep. Getting enough sleep actually turns down the appetite, boosts the immune system, lowers stress. That's something you can do without affecting what you eat. It's a way to prepare yourself to make better choices later on. So that's one thing. The second thing that you can do is to have, again, an accountability partner and someone to talk to. because by having that, you have somewhere to go and somewhere to deal with your stress. I am a man of faith, so I believe that whatever faith tradition you come from, use it to your advantage, and be a part of a fellowship of like-minded believers, whatever your belief system is, because that studies show actually does help to lower stress as well. And then outside of the kitchen, exercises outside of the kitchen, but you don't have to go start running marathons. You don't have to try and be Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime. What you need to do is simply find a way to start off with 15 to 30 minutes a day of cardiovascular exercise that doesn't even have to be moderate or intense. It can just be mild. Why do I say that? Because the way our bodies work, it is like a flywheel. Once you start exercising and your body meets the task at hand, it will almost desire more. It will want to do more. So you just got to start doing what you can. And if you do that for long enough, your body will say, this is easy, let's do more. How can you get that? Well, I'm here in the winter, it's completely snowed in around my house. Stairs. If you have stairs in your house, go up and down the stairs and time yourself and try and keep track of how much time you're doing that. Obviously, if you can get outside, that's the best thing. Go outside and walk, but that's all you have to do. Even if you just walk around in your apartment for so many minutes a day, every commercial break, I used to tell my patients, every commercial, you like watching TV, you like sitting and watch TV, every commercial break, get up and walk. Walk in place, walk around your apartment, walk around your house, but walk. Over time, that you will build more and more tolerance to that, and you'll want to do more. And then you have to be intentional and start to get to training. If you can, obviously get a personal trainer, get to where you get a plan, but start with just walking. It works.
Just do something.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Dr. Walsh, what's the real truth about weight loss?
The real truth about weight loss is that it is doable, that we know what works. And we know what works is a whole food, plant-based diet, in a lifestyle that reduces stress and inflammation. So the real truth about weight loss is that it's more than just what you put in your mouth. It's how you sleep. It's what your relationships in life are like. It has everything to do with your ability to manage stress. But it also has everything to do with what's in your cupboards and what's in your refrigerator. All of it works together. The real truth about weight loss is that you can do it, and you can do it now if you just implement some simple steps. One of the first ones is making sure you have a plan to change your palate and replace what you're eating now with a whole food, plant-based diet.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Dr. Walsh.
Thanks for having me again.